I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today I'm reviewing the new Suzuki Swift. Always one of the best cheap and cheerful cars on the market. But little cars here in Australia and around the world have gotten so much more expensive in recent years, including the new Swift, although not quite to the same degree as a bunch of other big names in the small car segment. Vehicles like the Toyota Yaris, Mazda 2, Volkswagen Polo, and even the new MG3 have all gotten considerably more expensive. Well, the new Swift is now a mild hybrid, which should help it save you even more at the Bowser, but you will have to pay more to get into the car in the first place. Now, the variant that I've got on test is the new Swift Hybrid GLX, which is the top of the range vehicle currently on sale for a touch under $30,000 drive away. Now, that's a lot of money for a Suzuki Swift, but you might not need the GLX. We'll discuss all of that in today's video. We'll check out the interior, the boot, discuss the running costs, and if the hybrid system actually works on this vehicle. We'll take the new Swift for a drive, and then I'll give you my verdict about whether this is a small car that you should buy. But before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. All right, jumping into the Swift Hybrid now, let's talk price because that is so key when buying into a vehicle like this. You do want it to not cost you too much up front and therefore be able to start saving money from the word go compared to buying more expensive cars. So how much does this car cost? Well, a base Swift Hybrid will set you back $24,490 drive away for a manual transmission. They still have a manual, how good's that? In white paint. Step up to the Swift Plus, which is a bit of a sweet spot in terms of spec, and that'll set you back $28,490, whereas this GLX is a bit posh. It's got all the features, and this one is $29,490. Now, by the time you're talking about $500 less than 30 grand on a Swift, that's probably a little bit more than I'd personally be willing to spend on this vehicle. So I would probably keep it basic and just go for the cheapest possible Suzuki Swift spec. Can you get away with that spec? Well, maybe. First of all, let's have a look at what you get in the GLX, because this really does have all the fruit as far as the Suzuki Swift is concerned. Leather steering wheel, nice cloth seats with height adjustment for the driver. That's an important point. We'll come back to that. 9-inch touchscreen, although all Swifts get this touchscreen, which is great, including wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and that has worked flawlessly in my time with the car. GLX does pick up climate control, not that you really need that because all Swifts have basic air conditioning anyway, although the GLX has niceties like heating vents in the back, heated seats here in the front, and wireless smartphone charging, which is all a little bit premium. Now, the Plus is a sweet spot. It does keep things like a better stereo, your leather steering wheel, and height adjustment for the driver's seat. If you do go for my preferred spec, the cheapest possible Swift with the manual transmission, you can't even change the height of the driver's seat. So you'd have to check very carefully in the dealership that you like where the seat is set before signing on the dotted line for that car. The base model also has a plastic steering wheel and only 2 speakers. But if you were buying the Swift just as a runabout, perhaps not your main car, maybe a second car, or maybe you just don't really care about having all the amenities in your vehicle and you just want a nicely built, durable, good to drive, fuel efficient hatch that you're not spending heaps of money on, well, that base model could be for you. What about the rest of the interior? Well, the layout is fantastic. Everything is where you would expect. You've got simple physical shortcuts here on the steering wheel for your little trip computer, which works great for things like your adaptive cruise control, your lane keeping, and your Bluetooth telephony for your phone. And then over here, as I mentioned, we've got a standard touchscreen. Again, the interface is simple to work with, but I just have my phone running on wireless CarPlay, and that comes up straight away every time. Easy to use climate controls down here. The automatic transmission selector is right where you would expect. And the seats themselves are actually relatively comfortable and ergonomic, even though they don't have anything like lumbar adjustment, which is where you'd have to start looking at some more premium vehicles in this segment. And then of course you would be spending more. Storage is reasonable. We've got small to medium sized cup holders down here. You do have a bottle holder in the doors, but something you don't have is an armrest, even on this GLX. And it's worth mentioning that vehicles like the Volkswagen Polo and especially the new Skoda Fabia are not that much more expensive than a top-of-the-range Suzuki Swift. So if you're already thinking about spending $30,000, $32,000, you might want to look at one of those European options instead. Up here at the top of the Swift range, the value isn't as clear. Well, that's the front seat. Let's check out the back. Here in the back seat, we can see how Suzuki continue to be some of the very best in the industry at packaging little cars. The Swift continues to be really short, under 3.9 meters in length, so you will get this thing into tiny parking spots, as I have been using and abusing this past week, living in the inner city. But yet, look at how much space there is in the back. I've got my driving seat set up for me. I'm 6', 183 centimeters tall, and I am perfectly well accommodated here in the back. Headroom's good, legroom's fine, tow room's good. Honestly, the room in the back of this Swift is better than most vehicles in the segment above this one in terms of physical size. So well done, Suzuki. Now, don't go looking for too many luxuries back here. We don't have anything like a flip down armrest or air vents, although there are heater ducts only beneath these seats up front. And of course, just like up front, mostly hard materials here in the back, including the armrest on the door. So it's all pretty austere in the back of a Suzuki Swift. But the point is, you can easily chuck two adults back here. You can drive them around. This thing really does work from a packaging perspective, which is great. Not much for us to talk about, so let's go have a look at the boot. Moving around the back of the Swift now, a word on design, which is to say there aren't many words on design. Suzuki have kept the Swift looking almost identical to the old one. It actually is a new generation, and yet clearly the aesthetics of the previous car are what buyers were telling Suzuki in focus groups that they wanted to keep. And personally, I'm fine with that because this is a cleanly styled small car, quite handsome, and this orange paint is also quite fetching, I think. But what about the boot? Of course, it is manual, but that's fine in this segment, as is the boot really. 265 litres, well, it is small, but this vehicle is small. As I mentioned in the back seat, the dimensions are really tight. You can get a couple of boxes in here. We've got our camera gear in here, which is actually no mean feat. You've got a little cargo blind, so your valuables won't be seen if you store them here. And you can actually flip down those back seats as well if you need to expand space. But I don't think too many people are purchasing a Swift thinking it's going to be the largest vehicle in the world. So from my perspective, it certainly gets the job done. All right, let's discuss the running costs of the Suzuki Swift, because when you buy a small car like this, you want it to be nice and cheap to run. And in most ways, that is the case with the new Swift. Now, right up front, I mentioned that this car is now a hybrid, and Suzuki's very proud of that fact, and they slap a hybrid badge right on the tailgate. But don't go comparing this vehicle directly to something like the Toyota Yaris hybrid, because the hybrid system in this bad boy is much more mild and it contributes much less in terms of power to the engine. So you are relying on this car's non-turbo 3-cylinder petrol engine more. So what does that do to your fuel economy in a vehicle that can accept the cheapest 91 octane fuel? Well, basically, it's not as fuel efficient as something like the Yaris hybrid. So Suzuki claims 4 litres per 100 kilometres combined for the Swift automatic. I've been getting 4.7 over my week of testing with this vehicle. Now, a little bit less than 20% worse than the claim is pretty normal for any car versus its laboratory tests, so that's not particularly surprising. In a Toyota Yaris, you'd probably do 3.5 to 4 litres per 100 kilometres without trying particularly hard. So you might think, gee, that car is an awful lot more fuel efficient. And it is, but because the numbers themselves are so small, and the fact that the Yaris is about $10,000 more expensive like for like compared to a Swift, you could drive this car for hundreds of thousands of kilometres before you'd ever recoup the difference to what you'd be spending on a Yaris hybrid. So this car actually still works out in terms of its fuel consumption and a value for money perspective. Servicing, not as cheap as some rivals, however. 5 years of servicing for this vehicle will set you back just under $2,000. It's considerably less to service that Toyota Yaris hybrid. That's where Toyota kind of flexes its scale here in Australia. So you will have to put a bit more money aside to maintain the Swift, but the warranty on the vehicle is 5 years with unlimited kilometres. Okay, let's take the new Suzuki Swift out for a drive. Now, my expectations are pretty high when it comes to testing the Swift because while this has always been one of the smallest, cheapest new cars on the Australian market, it carries with it a really strong reputation for driving dynamics. So even though it's totally fine to buy this car if you just want a small, reliable, durable Japanese car, the thing about the Swift has always been that for keen drivers, it's also quite a fun vehicle dynamically. And I'm pleased to report that that is still the case in the new generation Swift. The chassis is one of the standout features of this car. But first of all, I want to talk about the hybrid system, because it's really important that we make some clear distinctions between hybrids, because Suzuki's decided to go all out with marketing this car as the Swift Hybrid. You go on the website, it's called the Swift Hybrid, it's got the big hybrid badge on the back. Is this car a hybrid? Kind of. Only in the sense that like almost every premium car we test these days is a mild hybrid. They don't say hybrid, you know, Audi doesn't say the Q5 hybrid, and yet those cars have mild hybrid systems, which is what we have in the Swift. So it really is a tiny battery that mainly takes the stress off things like the electrics and the start-stop system and the climate control, so that your overall fuel use does come down. It isn't doing much at all to assist the powertrain. And as a result, the Swift continues to be distinctly not a fast car. So what we have here is a non-turbocharged 3-cylinder petrol engine that makes 61 kilowatts of power and 112 Newton meters of torque, which are some of the lowest outputs of any new car on the market. It is paired to a continuously variable automatic transmission, and that actually works okay in this application, because what you need in the Swift to keep your speed up if you want to go fast is revs, and the CVT certainly delivers them. You hear it, but you also do make progress. And one of the reasons this car doesn't feel interminably slow, despite having really no power, is that it is extremely light. And I mean light, about 950 kilos. This thing is lighter than a Mazda MX-5. It is really difficult to make cars this light while still complying with modern safety standards, and also including all the convenience tech that people expect and deserve these days in a market like ours. You know, this car is really quite well specified from the base model up, with your air conditioning, wireless CarPlay, all of that sort of thing, and being able to achieve such a lightweight is honestly an amazing feat. And the lightness of the Swift is really its defining characteristic. It does genuinely feel light on its feet. You know, we don't have to pull out platitudes like, oh, the Swift, you know, it feels so much smaller than it is, or it feels lighter than it is. No, it's literally just small. It's literally just light. And that makes it really fun and easy to drive. And on a fun country road like the one that I've chosen for today's video, it's a really fun vehicle. Unsurprisingly, the Swift is pretty enthusiastic about being driven in a sporty fashion, because it doesn't take all that much motivation to get it to turn in. The front end is really light, and the wheelbase is super short, so the whole car kind of follows that front end almost immediately. It feels grippy and tenacious, doesn't have the best tires in the world, but again, it doesn't really need them because our grip levels are already pretty high, and the chassis is really capable and feels rigid and sweet and slick. And so you can easily tighten your line. The steering is okay. Once you've turned in enough, it is actually precise. It is a bit dead on center, and the rack is slower than I want actually, so you have to turn this thing in a little bit more than you'd be normally expecting in some other cars of the segment, but it does get the job done. Where there are some shortcomings dynamically is in how that mild hybrid system has been tuned into the overall powertrain. So at times there's a bit of a kind of surgy effect in the throttle pedal, which is unexpected. And the brake pedal has that sort of sponginess transitioning into a feeling of being wooden, which is quite common for the less refined hybrid systems out there. So modern Toyotas, for instance, have pretty much dialed out that effect. And I think if you drove this car back to back against a Toyota Yaris Hybrid, you would see that the Yaris Hybrid was considerably better tuned in terms of its hybrid and petrol systems working together. But as we mentioned before, the Yaris Hybrid is so much more expensive than the Swift. This car doesn't have to be that good, and frankly, it's not far off. That being said, one thing the Swift always had as a competitive advantage was that the other cars in the segment weren't that great to drive. Well, the Yaris, Polo, Fabia, even the new MG3 are decent dynamically, so the Suzuki doesn't sort of stand out as much in that regard as it once did, but it is still cheerful to drive, reasonably economical, and it's a relatively affordable package in 2024 terms, which is good. They really do get some other things right as well. Even though this is a small, light car, it actually rides well. The damping is very good. The ride is firm, absolutely. When you go over a bump or an expansion joint, you do feel it in the cabin, but the ride itself is disciplined, so it doesn't crash through into the cabin and cause massive discomfort to the passengers. And another thing which is considerably improved over the old Swift is noise insulation. It really is a night and day difference. The old Swift was really noisy and unrefined due to the road noise inside the car. That is considerably quieter in the new gen vehicle, which is good. That just makes driving more relaxing. It also makes it easier to enjoy your tunes on the 6-speaker stereo in this model, which is actually a relatively decent unit. One other thing Suzuki has done quite well is the integration of safety systems into this car. Like other new vehicles on the market, the Swift does have to have things like lane keeping assist, speed limit assist, that sort of thing, and yet it's been integrated in a way that does meet the Australian minimum requirements, but it doesn't annoy you or get in your way. So for instance, the speed limit assist doesn't beep at you or vibrate at you like it does in some Hyundai and Kia products, for instance. The lane centering is well tuned so that it does actually work if you start to drift out of your lane, but if you're taking a sporty line in the corners, like I am now, it's actually not nipping at the steering wheel at all. So it's quite well tuned, better than many cars triple the price. So I'm impressed about that. We do have some modern safety tech, but it's actually been thoughtfully implemented by Suzuki. So what is my final verdict on the new Suzuki Swift? Well, this is a really good vehicle. All small cars have become more expensive in recent years. The Suzuki is included in that list, yet it has fought off the kind of dramatic increases that we've seen from some other manufacturers. And the fact that the Swift, with its mild hybrid system, is cheaper even than the new MG3 hybrid, considerably cheaper than the Toyota Yaris hybrid, means that there is a case for this vehicle, even if it isn't as fuel efficient as those cars. Why? Because you're opening your wallet less to start with to even get into this car. Add to the fact it's a Suzuki, it's a durable vehicle from a known quantity manufacturer, and I think there's some safety in purchasing this car as well. That being said, it's most compelling at the bottom of the range, particularly if you can drive a manual. You're getting a bit of a steal in the base manual of this car. If you're thinking about buying one of the more expensive Swifts, I'd probably recommend checking out a car like the Skoda Fabia Select. Okay, it is European and it does have a dual clutch automatic, which might give you the heebie-jeebies, but it also has a 7-year warranty. So if you're going Swift, my recommendation would be to keep it cheap. Keen to know your opinion? Please let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell if you enjoy the kinds of videos Chasing Cars makes. And as always, thank you for watching.